Yes, indeed. 1st of April 2014. That's when the law really came into operation. And I'm very glad to see that from then on, we're about to get to the 1st of April 2021, almost 7 years. It's been a long journey. And it's important for us to realize that the law itself was, in many ways, alien to the country. It was alien to the entire world. It was the very first attempt anywhere on the planet to actually formalize and bring in legislation. And I can say with some conviction that the first year or two, the corporates found it difficult to engage with the new law. There were mental block issues, there were operational issues, there were perception issues, and a whole lot of stuff like that. It was only after the first 2 years had elapsed that corporates really begin to see or began to see this kind of a legislation as actually an opportunity for them to demonstrate their commitment to the society to which they belong. And I see then from around the early part of 2016 a very positive change in the attitude of corporates and also the preparedness of NGOs. When I made this law, there were two or three important things that were important here. One, it is a spending law. Therefore, you must spend. And Josna rightly said that yes, we quote numbers on spends. That is the first part. If you spend, then only you will be conscious of how you spent it, where you spent it, and can it be spent better. But if you don't spend at all, you're wasting your time. So in the first place, it is a spending law, which means 2% of your average net profits, right? The second part is that this is a triumvirate or a triangular approach in which the government is the facilitator. Its role is just to facilitate and nothing more. It is for the corporate entity, which comes under the scheme of the law, to provide the resources, the supervision, and the assistance. But the work at the grassroots level is neither to be done by government nor by the corporate. The third arm of this triangle, which is the NGO, the implementing agency as we call it, it is that which actually implements on the ground. And it is when these three are in perfect cohesion that you really begin to get results on the field. And when you begin to see what is actually being done on the ground, that is when you realize that can CSR be seen? Yes, when things work in synergy. Over these years, as Josna rightly said, a fairly large amount of money has been spent. Is it visible? And she rightly said, yes, of course it is visible, but of course it can be more visible than ever before. And there are strategies, I'm sure Garima will elaborate on that, as to how we can make them even more visible than they are now. One part, Josna herself is a specialist on this, the audit part. Just now, yesterday, in fact, the ICAI has released the first ever guidelines in the entire planet, which guides auditors as to how they should audit CSR. I mean, think where CSR has gone from something that people just did as a feel good, I'm feeling good today, so let's do some CSR, that kind of intermittent stuff that happened before 2013, to a very now strategized CSR approach that we have today. I'll end my opening remarks only at this stage by saying that we have come a long way. As always, there's much, much more to do. But in what we have achieved, we should definitely take pride. I know you're going to ask me for one example, so I'll take that question from you and answer it straight away before I hand over it back to you. Let me say this with my own eyes that 3 or 4 days ago, I was in Konark. I belonged to the Odisha cadre of the IAS in my heydays, so it was a pleasure to go back. Actually, when I drafted Schedule 7, as I wrote it out, I had completely forgotten about culture and heritage. And I remember that a few minutes before we sent the draft of Schedule 7 to Parliament, it suddenly occurred to me that I was Director Cultural Relations of the Government of India for 5 years. And imagine me forgetting it. So I shoved it into Schedule 7 at the very last minute before the paper was snatched from my hands. And I'm so happy to see how Indian Oil Corporation has now taken over a large part of the maintenance of the Konark temple, which, as you know, is a 10th century temple, subject to tremendously strong, salty winds from the ocean and therefore erosion. And the way that the Archaeological Survey of India, the IOC, has completely transformed the area around the temple and redone so much of the cultural heritage in its preservation was a pride to see. And in many ways, it warmed the cockles of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee, for that confession as well, which I'm sure will be in your book when it comes out. A quick question on the handbook for audit. What is that handbook from the Institute of Chartered Accountants responding to? Is it because companies did not have an idea, or were things not being used properly? And what could it do? I mean, for those who are listening, I'm sure this will be useful.
Yeah, the primary call was the fact that a traditional auditor is a financial auditor. It looks at, vouchers, balance sheets, profit and loss accounts, analyzes and stuff like that. But when you go to social audit, in terms of what you do in terms of social outputs, traditionally our audit courses, audit learning that we teach, does not cover that aspect. So ICI has not only been putting this thing together for a while, they've actually been conducting courses and papers on how to do audit for social programs. And this handbook is a compilation for all auditors. Nowadays, because the money spends are high, corporates are insisting on very strong audits of their CSR outputs. So this you will find very, very useful, and I'm sure Jyotsna will also find it useful. It just issued yesterday, so it will be something nice for everyone.
If it's not visible, to pose the counter question, why are we saying that it's not visible? And if so, what is the course correction that we need to do, if so, at this point of time?
Straight answer to your question is that in terms of visibility, I would say that we've come around 60 to 65%. And that is not bad. It's pretty good. Uh, is it showing up? Yes, because many corporates are actually showcasing their achievements. To use the word show a couple of times, as Garima rightly said. When there is pride in doing something and you showcase it, then you also are prepared to put it to the test so that people can go there and say, hey, is it really showing or not? So I would say that yes, there is pride and there is also showcasing, which is a good thing for us to understand that CSR is now being visible. Let me take a crass example to show you why it is not visible. I was sitting, and I sit on so many juries, but one very prominent bank came across, and it gave me a bit of a tickle in my sense of humor, saying that, we do so much CSR, Dr. Chatterjee, you will be amazed. Last year, we actually saved 100 metric tons of paper. And I said, wow, that's terrific. Of course, I can't see that paper, but how did you do that? And I said, we stopped all our junior executives from taking printouts on their, printing machines. And I said, look, what kind of CSR is this? I mean, surely you've got to move away from, obfuscation. Come out into the open and say, what is it that you've done on the ground for real people and undertaking real programs? So what I'm trying to say is that initial part of saying things that really didn't mean anything, the kind of thing that Jyotsna was saying, we are touching the lives of 2 million people. When I hear sentences like this, actually curdle, because this is going nowhere. What we don't need is anecdotal evidence. What we want to believe is in real-time data. Two or three quick things I'd like to bring in here. One, the National CSR Awards, about which Garima spoke, were a way of incentivizing the way that CSR operates with corporates and with NGOs. I actually started that concept just before I left the IICA. I'm glad it's now become operational. They actually go and see on the field and they verify. And it is only then that the Prime Minister gives away those awards. These are national awards. And the level of competition is just incredible. So it shows you that when we actually highlight achievements, we value that which is visible. The second point I wanted to say was that in national emergencies, such as the COVID one now, government reaches out to that law which we passed in 2013, saying that now let all COVID activities be covered under Schedule 7. Let's set up the PM Cares Fund, again under Schedule 7. So in times of real difficulty, this is also where the CSR legislation helps. And you can see visibly now how much has actually happened in the world of COVID. Can we hide that? Lastly, yes, CSR is very strongly board driven. What does that ensure? That the finest minds in the company are involved in the CSR program. They strategize, they decide what's to be done. And because CSR decisions are taken at the highest levels in companies, they ensure that that visibility comes through. And last, more and more corporates are understanding that you have to be able to say where that money went, where the outcomes are, not just the output. So do very good assessment, do very careful assessment of the impact that your programs actually leave on the ground. That's all I want to say now.
Okay, so I'm going to come to impact in a moment, but the example that you said about this bank saving 100 metric tons of paper, now this is also something that is a reflection of the thinking at the board, or is it, something transmission loss downstream?
No, it was the thinking of the board, and I was surprised that it happened because this decision was taken at their board level. But this was in the early days. It probably won't happen now. But at the time when corporates were still not fully aware of how they should go about it and how they should reach out to to those parts of society which really needed help and care, not in this sort of jugglery.
Right. Okay.
I'd only say this, that what is one way of, let's say, moving from 60-40 to 70-30? I mean, that would be a good achievement. If you were at 70-30, I'd say it's really good. And that's what strategy that was used earlier on in our discussion is vitally important. When corporates in their boardrooms actually plan CSR projects, now you would remember that when I had made the law, I said every single CSR activity must be a project. If it is axiomatic and often quoted as a Chatterjeeism, that if it's not a project, it's not CSR. And why did I projectivize it? Because a project is something that you can assess, you can monitor, you can assign it monies and track it from beginning to end. And when it's finished or even in between, you can do assessment of its impact, and you can also put in corrections as they go along. So one of the important parts of the strategy is get the project conceptualized very carefully. Plan the impact assessment even before you begin the project.
Exactly.
If your objectives are fuzzy, you're pretty much doomed to failure. And therefore, what we said in the law was this: because the best minds in the company are involved in this, therefore the strategization will be good. So that's one way, but I still feel that the strategy aspect needs a lot of more attention than it's been given to so far. This is one way of getting across to it.
So let me go down that path a little more. So when we say, and for those who are listening, are in strategy positions or will be at some point. Now, what is the one input that's missing in your mind when you look at some of these projects or attempted projects? What are the things that are missing, or what is the one or two critical things that are missing? One is the thinking, which you rightly said, which reflects strategy and objective. But apart from that, what's missing? So people could maybe focus on that in order to at least get their first part of the act together.
Okay, so straight off, two things I'll mention. One is identifying the need. You go into a village, you see it doesn't have, maybe it has only one school, and you say, okay, let's put another school in here. But if you were to ask the villagers and really do a need assessment, they would say, we have arsenic in our water. For us, getting water and life is far more important than building a second school. And if you'd done that, you would do what is really needed or what would create the maximum impact. So to make CSR need oriented, one. Two, I see that the monitoring is often loose, tardy, ineffectual, intermittent. And that doesn't speak very well of the CSR heads or the CSR committees to which they report. I'm not saying that this is universal. I'm just saying that the project is or has to be very tightly monitored in order to achieve results. And that's a universal law. CSR projects need harder and harsher monitoring. That way we can get better results. And finally, across the world, when you come to anything that needs good outputs, you use standards. Therefore, ISO 9001 and so on and so forth. Is there a standards for Indian CSR? Remember, ISO 26001 happened years ago, done in Europe for the European perception. We've done 7 years of CSR in India. We don't even have basic standards. If you don't have standards, to what will you measure your outcomes? Against what standards? If you don't have a yardstick, how will you measure the mile? And so I'm happy to report that I have been the chief from the board of the BIS, the Board of Indian Standards, and we have just submitted to them the first ever standards on Indian CSR. And what will happen then is news for all of us, and I want to say this loud and clear. Very soon, when we launch these standards, we're also starting a rating system in the BIS. So as a corporate, you can apply, and you will get anything between 1 star to 5 stars. There is already now a race that has gotten off among the best corporates, say, hey, let's apply and see what star rating we get. And if you were a corporate chief and you had your CSR person reporting to you, you would say to the chief, go out there and see how many stars you get. It's not about what you say or I say. It's what about an independent agency rating you tells us what you deserve. So this is a very strong new initiative that we've just launched.
Right, and that's a useful input as well here. So and two questions. So one is, the example that you used about setting up a school when there is, let's say, a problem with the water supply in that place, and that's you're really saying or you're reflecting a real world example. Am I right?
Correct.
I mean, right. Okay. So now, when the star system that you speak of, in which is more of it's a recognition, is accounts for these kind of things, fit as in projects that are fit to purpose and so on.
Yes. So it measures first your compliance. If you are not compliant, you can't even enter or ask for a rating. But thereafter, it takes 2 levels of audit. Josna, this will be music to your ears. If you are not a scheduled auditor empaneled by the BIS, you cannot audit. So this is not about you submitting papers to the BIS committee and the BIS committee is saying, we trust you based on your papers, here's a 5-star rating. It has to go through 2 stages of audit, field verification, and then a full-fledged submission before the BIS audit, the CSR committee, a full-fledged presentation. And only then will you get your star rating. So let's say you applied for 4 stars. The BIS committee can say, sorry, you only deserve 2. Take it or leave it. Then you're free to come back the next year and say, no, I didn't want the 2-star rating. My boss would have killed me. So now come back, and now I'm ready to get my 4-star. So this will give you incentives. It'll also give you correctionals. It'll give a lot of people a chance to really measure up against, the accepted standards in India.
Dr. Chatterjee, can I come to you? We've got only a couple of minutes now because apparently this switches off automatically at 7. So, and the organizers want to come in too. So, quick questions to you. The first is from Abhishek Ranjan. Large and mid-sized companies are mandated by CSR law. What would be the motivation for small and medium enterprises to do CSR?
Well, follow the examples of the bigger companies, because one day, aspirationally, the smaller companies are going to become medium. So if they start, there are 2 ways I can say this very quickly. 1, start small, very small, whatever you are attracted to. 2, look for a medium company with which to collaborate, or a bigger company with which to collaborate. So if you use these 2 strategies, start small and collaborate, partnership, you will get to a beginning. And that's the way to go for me.
Okay, Sudhir Sahni asks you, Dr. Chatterjee.
Can I add one thing, just with sir, one second. One is that there is a separate award reserved for MSME. That is also a good enough reason.
That's a good incentive to, yeah, absolutely. Sudhir Sahni asks.
Sorry, I also want to add on to this. I have so many small and medium businesses which are coming and saying, please, let's do our CSR, irrespective of whether it's mandated or not. They are the biggest sector of my business,
Wonderful. So happy to learn that.
Yeah.